Charles, there we are. It's a special episode. People have been hungry for a walk and talk, so I'll walk and you can talk.
We could both talk.
We could both
So
talk.
Jason, where are the palm trees?
Yeah, the palm trees are gone, Charles. I am here. I'm in Washington, D.C., as people can probably tell. It's interesting. I'm right outside the Capitol building, Charles, and it's pretty depressing to come to Washington, D.C., even more than normal, because they've got these fences back up around the Capitol building. I don't know, have you been here? The last time you were here was January 6th, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that'll be the last time I ever go there.
Yeah. Well, I came today to attend the I was going to call it James Comer's Shitbird Rotisserie and have him in like a barbecue outfit and everything. But, Charles?
That would have been funny.
Okay,
hey,
so
yeah,
wait.
I'm here.
We just had a near technical glitch, and I've got the backup to save us. You see, it tried to throw me off again after all that testing you and I just did, but we're going to keep going. Hang on, I've got the backup. Can you still hear me, Charles?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so hang on. We're going to do this. I'm very, very annoyed with this thing since the last time. But fashion method. You should be able to hear me still.
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. I see Washington, D.C. and all its rot.
Yeah. So I was at the hearing, and, Vijaya Gaddy and Yoel Roth and Jim Baker were there getting yelled at. And you got to see it, right? There's a lot of stuff for us to talk about other than Twitter. There's so much going on. Where would you like to begin, Charles?
I think a report from hell, where you are.
Yeah.
9th or 10th circle of hell. We should start with that, and then we could jump into the bombshell Seymour Hersh revelations, which I've made a lot of progress advancing around the world with our various media contacts. So there's a lot going on with that.
That's excellent. I definitely want to hear about that. Just to do a little overview of the hearing, we're not going to be in the First Amendment forum today, Charles, just because it's so hectic for me to be outside here and doing all this technical stuff, and then switching it up was just going to be a disaster. So we're just going to do a regular, straight-up version of the show. People can still catch the First Amendment Forum episodes and sponsor Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth, patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, and my new favorite, odyssey.com/crowdsource the truth. The stupid Mario brothers are still trying to sue Odyssey, so people sponsoring on Odyssey helps me, helps independent media, independent video hosts that are trying to fight big tech and all that. And speaking of big tech, Charles, it was disgusting to see how the Democrat members of Congress were basically laughing at this. Many of them said, I don't even know why we're here talking about this. And they tried to turn it into a January 6th redo, asking Twitter about, it isn't, why didn't you guys do X, Y, and Z about January 6th? And didn't you use some of these policies to stop crazy stuff from happening on January 6th? I don't know if they're stupid or in on it or what, but they don't seem to care about the notion of a private sector company being infiltrated by an agency of the government, and that agency being the FBI and others, and violating people's First Amendment and Fourth Amendment rights. I don't know if you got to see towards the end of today, Ms. Luna, I'm not sure what state she's from, but she devastated, in my opinion, Charles, because she had evidence in the form of some sort of communications between Yoel Roth and the FBI, and they were asking like, hey, do you remember speaking to the FBI on this weird cloud-based communications thing? And he's like, oh no, not to my recollection. And she's like, well, boom, here it is. Here's your communication with them. And she went on to tell them that each of them have been involved in, becoming, I forget the exact term they use. There's some legal term for when you become a state actor as a private individual. And she said, this is the thing, and we're going to hold you to account. And then AOC and her little contingent on the left of where I was sitting, rightly so, they got all exercised, and AOC interrupted the meeting and said that she wanted the chairman, who is James Comer, to remind everybody, that you're not allowed to intimidate witnesses. She felt that explaining to them that they were going to be held to account and that justice would be served was intimidating the witnesses. And she said, without evidence. But the only problem is Luna had presented evidence. So it really was, again, so much of this stuff that goes on in Congress, if people haven't had the misfortune to see it, it's theater, Rand Paul, as a diminutive doctor would say. But I don't know, Charles. It didn't seem to go really anywhere today.
Well, a lot of times this is what happens because the rules of the House are structured typically to give equal time in these question sessions. So every member on the committee gets 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And, we get the pleasure of talking, you and I, for an hour, 2 hours to really go into topics in depth. And if you're if you've ever been deposed, as I have many times, the depositions can run, 3, 5, 8 hours.
Yeah.
And then the questioner will come at you from one direction, then another direction, and yet another direction, and ask the same question 4 different ways. And so in this format, it's almost by design, Congress is not able to do the type of oversight that it needs to do. And then on top of that, these members are on multiple different main committees and subcommittees, and they got to go back to their districts. And to me, it's almost as if this whole thing is a charade that is meant to deceive the American public, that there's any real accountability of the executive branch to the people, there's any real oversight of the of anything, frankly, and that it's just one endless cycle where the people who get close to it ultimately tire of all the bureaucracy and the bullshit, and then they get picked off in higher money jobs, whether that's lobbyists or partners in law firms or both.
Absolutely.
So it's really distressing to watch this as our economy sinks deeper into the swamp as we rush headlong to World War III. I did watch though AOC live earlier around 11:30 or thereabouts, and she thought it was a case where she thought she was being really cool and coming across well. She came across like a moron, and she was accusing Twitter of falsely spreading the rumor that some Boston Children's Hospital was suggesting that young children could come to the hospital to get hysterectomies. And then she tried to say that because of those false accusations, there was a bomb threat against the hospital. Well, one or more different Twitter users rapidly put together posts that said, okay, AOC, obviously you didn't see this. And there's this video of somebody at the hospital doing precisely what the person stood accused of. And she thought she was going to do the surface level sleight of hand trick, and that all of her many million dumbass followers would turn this into a lynching of Elon Musk, and how can we let Elon Musk have control of one person of this thing? I don't think that wore well. I don't think she wears well. And she's going to get her comeuppance. In contrast, somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's certainly got her flamboyant tendencies, she kicked some serious butt. Well, what I saw, I mean, she was just really good, as was Nancy Mace, who, by the way, Nancy Mace is accused by many of being a rhino.
Huh.
You know, she was very good. Nancy Mace went through and as Bannon likes to say, delivered the receipts. I mean, first of all, she said, by the way, I took the second shot, and afterward I got asthma, which hasn't gone away. I've got heart issues that nobody can explain. I've got tremors in my left hand. And, you know, all this because Twitter suppressed dissenting views, or maybe they're mainstream views now, of what was going on, what the options were for treatment. And then she humiliated that lawyer. She said, now,
well, which one? There were two lawyers.
Cool.
There were two lawyers, Vijaya Gaddy and Akira or something. I forget the other one's name. Which lawyer did she embarrass?
The chief lawyer, Vijaya Gaddy.
Yeah.
So she said, Ms. Gaddy, I just would like to ask you, what medical school did you go to? And she said, I didn't go to medical school. What did you say?
Yeah.
I didn't go to medical school. That's right.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was good. It was good. The performance from the Democrats was pathetic. The that other lawyer whose name I'm forgetting, who used to be at Twitter, who she was the whistleblower who they brought, who was making some big deal on January 6th, like saying like, oh, this is violence. And the problem that I have with Congress is that they rely on these foregone conclusions like Russia hacked the election and January 6th was an incitement to violence by Donald Trump. They state these things as if they are decided facts, but nobody has really come to that conclusion other than the court of public opinion of people whose opinions are wrong. And I mean, they're basically accusing Trump of a crime, and they predicate all of their subsequent decisions on these foregone conclusions that are inaccurate. Now, Charles, I think I'm standing right in the spot where you and I were on January 6th. Am I correct? Like, I think
I can't really. Yeah, I think you're close. I mean, we were many different places.
Because remember, but when the whole riot started, there were all these police cars over there, and all these different groups were coming up this way, and you and I were standing, kind of like I think right here, by this, looking up this way.
Well, where do you see one of those National Historical Society markers commemorating that?
No, I don't see that. I see a lot of fences.
It's not yet, huh?
No, I see a lot of fences blocking this place off, and this city has become like a prison.
Yeah, I mean, it's really disgraceful what the city, what Washington D.C. It's never been a great place, but
I like it. I like the buildings, though. I mean, I know what you're saying, but I don't know. I guess I have like a sort of a little kid field trip from school attitude towards Washington, D.C., where everything feels like some major, I don't know. I kind of like Washington, D.C., except for the horrible things that are happening here.
Right.
But anyway, there's a lot more to discuss about that Twitter meeting, and we will be discussing it in the future, hopefully. I couldn't help but feeling, Charles, all of the things that the Democrats were saying to kind of say, oh, this is a meeting we shouldn't be having because you're just upset about this Hunter Biden laptop. I really feel that if they understood the full depth of the Twitter coup, which stupid Mario Luigi is attempting to rename the Twitter manifesto. That's another technique I want people to be aware of that social engineers use. They want to, or maybe it's narcissists or I don't know what, but they want to try to change the names of things. Stupid Mario did that all the time. Whenever I would have guests on and assign them, sort of code names, he would change the code name, and I didn't understand why. And then other people did that as well. But that changing the name of things, I'm not sure what the purpose is, but maybe it's to get you to comply to their will. It's a strange thing. But I feel like if Congress and the people in that room knew the full depth of the details in that report, they'd realize that this goes far beyond just the Hunter Biden laptop story. I don't understand how the people in Congress can be legitimately making those claims that they were making there today.
Well, just to address that for a second, when we started on this project, we did an early segment on the business model for charity fraud.
Yeah.
And I think there's a common theme that really maybe it started well before this, but certainly with movies and with rock concerts. You say you have a big box office. Nobody really knows how many tickets you sold.
Right.
Nobody knows how many you might have given away to friends. The artists never get fairly paid for whatever share they should have gotten of whatever they negotiated for. And I think the grifters around the world looked at this and said, this is chump change. The box office of movies, that's nothing compared to what nations around the world are prepared to spend on foreign aid. And now what the hysterians who will say, we've got a massive problem with HIV and AIDS. Okay, let's create the global fund. Let's blow $100 billion on that. Now the hysterians say we've got a climate change problem. That's another $1 trillion on that. And then COVID, that's $5 trillion on that. And it's far easier for these hysterians tied into the media, tied into the swamps, not just in DC, but around the world, to articulate there's this massive problem. Only they can solve it. They get the money. They steal as much of it as possible. By stealing, I mean they divert it to their friends. I mean, this guy, I think he's really a miserable human being, this James Clyburn, who it's revealed he's the one who basically, I think, plucked Biden out of the toilet bowl where he was after the first debate and engineered his installation as the nominee and then his ultimate victory. It now stands to reveal that many members of his family are collecting paychecks out of his various campaigns.
Clyburns?
That's chump change compared to what other people are doing, the Clintons, the Bushes, perhaps the Obamas, certainly the Bidens. And it's that the self-enrichment scheme, borrowing money from people who shouldn't be lending money to the U.S. government at the low interest rates that we're paying, and stealing that money and lying about what you do with that money and doing it again and again and again. And then when people get close to the truth, using the FBI, using the National Security Services to damage anybody who might dare challenge the grift.
Yeah.
And so we've done a jujitsu flip here.
Uh-huh.
The government was supposed to be protecting the people's interests and going after criminals. The inmates are running the asylum. The criminals are running the prosecutorial apparatus and the discretion not to prosecute. And the people are cheesed off, really cheesed off. And that's before they think through this. It's not fair to call it a bombshell, this report by Seymour Hersh. I'd really like to spend as much time as possible on that.
Absolutely. It's a nuclear arsenal. The last thing I want to say, Charles, because they did spend a lot of time talking about January 6th and being here outside the Capitol, kind of scrutinizing it with you for the first time since January 6th. Another really popular tactic is, now that January 6th is, the most disgraceful thing ever, they constantly come back to it. And, they do that all the time. They're going to smear anybody and everybody with any aspect of January 6th that they possibly can and use it as a motivation. I mean, you're talking about grifting. How much do all these fences cost? And how could they have ever justified that before January 6th took place? This secondary lawyer that I was bringing up, we'll go into depth on this thing at another time because I agree Seymour Hersh is very important. But she's studied at the Center for Critical Race Theory and Law or something like that. And she's all on and on and on about how January 6th needs to be the motivation for Twitter to moderate content. There was another communist member of the Politburo who said that the government, she said, we need to control social media for the people. It's like, what are you talking about? The Congress is not going to take over private technology companies or whatever, but it's a disaster that we could speak about endlessly, Charles. I think people do want to hear about Seymour Hersh and what he has revealed about something that we all already knew, that the United States bombed the Nord Stream pipeline.
Right. Well, so this morning, as I want to do, I got up early and I was patrolling the internet and I went on, forget where I saw it, but I think it was Free Republic was the first time I saw it. Somebody on Substack had this explosive headline saying, it was in fact the United States that destroyed Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And I nearly skipped over the Substack, but then I said, I really should read this. I'm on Substack. Eventually I'm going to publish. Who is this? And I saw it was Seymour Hersh. Yeah. And this is Seymour Hersh's first post on Substack.
That's amazing.
And he posted it, I want to say around 6 o'clock in the morning, roughly, this morning, New York time.
Uh-huh.
And he had to be doing a lot of thinking about it. This is an article that probably took several weeks to write. I mean, it's very detailed. It references a lot of inside sources. It's very, very well written, in my opinion. And he had obviously made a decision that he wanted to publish it right the morning after this disastrous display of a so-called State of the Union.
Yeah.
And it is noteworthy for a number of respects in my mind. First, you're talking about a man in his, I think, 80s, who was a long-time New York Times reporter who broke not only the My Lai massacre story, but also the Abu Ghraib prison story.
Huh.
So this is a man who stands up and is, in theory, exposing wrongdoing, whether it's by Lyndon Johnson and his administration, or Nixon, or whoever it was back then, or George W. Bush. And you can't fairly say that this guy is uncredentialed. He's won legitimate Pulitzer Prizes and many other awards, and he's got a lot of best-selling books and long service in actual investigative journalism. Moreover, he has a lot of ties around the world. the highest possible levels in many different government areas. So this article, I remember when the meathead, that's Joe Biden, the blockhead, when he got up and the Nord Stream pipeline event happened, he and many other disgusting minions who are in government, Jake Sullivan, Victoria Nuland, Anthony Blinken, and a whole bunch of people in the mainstream media spread like wildfire the lie that Russia blew up that pipe.
Wasn't that insane? Just stupid on its face.
Right. But it got a lot of print. Even after the Russia hoax had been debunked, that allegation got a lot of airtime, a lot of print inches in the mainstream press. And so the people who are prone to say, well, even now, I'm only going to believe what's printed in the Washington Post or the New York Times, they can dismiss some of these. They buy into the official regime theory that it was Russia that did it. And now, a year later or so, or however many months later, when Seymour Hersh says, no, wait a minute, that's not what happened. And what actually happened is far worse, in my opinion, than Iran-Contra. In Iran-Contra, if these allegations contained in the Hersh report are true or proven true, the way I read them is that the President of the United States, a long-time serving senator who had been chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, who knew the processes by which covert operations had to be approved in advance by the Gang of Eight, subverted that process. Working hand in glove with Victoria Nuland, Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, and unnamed others, they maneuvered this idea into a working group that they thought wouldn't have to report what they were doing through channels. And then they developed this plan which appears that Biden himself personally authorized. The rub on Iran-Contra is that Reagan didn't know what was going on.
Right.
Biden definitely knew what was going
Wow.
on. These Seymour Hersh allegations are true. And what we did is the American government, the American taxpayer, financed efforts in league, it appears, with Norway and possibly with Sweden and Denmark and other governments to bomb pipelines that were owned by private companies, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And in so doing, what happened? The price of natural gas and oil and other things went rocketing up. Who did that benefit? It benefited Burisma, because Burisma has substantial assets in the region whose value would go way up. Is that a reason that the owners of Burisma might have been very interested in paying off the Biden family in advance?
Wow.
I think it is.
It's terrorism for hire, Charles.
What?
That's terrorism for hire by the United States government.
Right, and the question here is if they're going to pay off the Biden family when Biden is vice president or afterwards when he's looking for work, not real hard work, but work. How many other people were paid off? Is it possible that politicians in Britain are being paid off? Might, for example, Boris Johnson be on the take? Is it possible that anybody who is, headlong in the rush to send more money to the corrupt Ukrainian regime, might they also all be on the tape? What about Jens Stoltenberg? What about other people in Norway and elsewhere? So the way Hersh lays the piece out, he doesn't give the names yet of the sources. Presumably they've asked for anonymity, but he has enough nuggets that responsible people who had this working theory last year have just quickly gotten articles out in the press, in part because I made them aware of this Hersh story. So our good friends at Document were able to get the Hersh story directly to this veteran journalist, documentarian, investigator type, who had written extensively about what was going on in the Arctic, in the contest between Russia and the West. And so he jumped all over this. There were 2 special discussions in Norway about this, their evening. And tomorrow, I hope to be on with them talking about this stuff. Separately, imagine getting this piece of news in Russia.
Yeah.
This is not the National Enquirer said this. This is not,
right.
Even with all due respect to you and to me, that we came up with this.
Right.
This is Seymour Hersh
But Charles,
laying out
isn't
the
it also
receipts.
interesting that Hersh is not publishing it in the New York Times? I wonder if any of those outlets would have refused to run something like this.
Well, I think the commercial opportunity for him in Substack is massive.
I agree.
I mean, and Substack, I'm gearing back up now. I've done enough of the work to figure out how I'm going to do it to finally start publishing again. Not in another publication, but from a lesser platform than Seymour Hersh has, but via the same tactic. So that went out, and then our good friends at Sputnik were made aware of this, and they are all over this.
Ooh,
Russian.
yeah.
Hmm?
What did Katya say about it?
Well, she's putting together. She's discussed all this with her colleagues, and the Russian government has made statements about this. And I think as they think about it overnight, we have the disadvantage. Not only is our command structure led by a chestnut with no nut in the center of his head, but while we're sleeping in this country, the Russians will be thinking, deciding, and acting. And we're not going to be able to change that. We're not going to go onto a footing where people in Washington, D.C. stay on the same time zone as Moscow. So they're going to move very aggressively. And when we think about, and we covered this extensively, you and I, and you and Lee Stranahan separately, when we think about how this started, the Russians didn't just out of nowhere say, we're going to commence a special military operation. There were complaints. They were met with silence and ignorance, no answers, no responses, and ultimately they went in, and the swamp geared it up to be, okay, we're protecting these valiant people who are being marauded by the Russians, and that's why we're doing this. This is not an offensive operation. That then quickly morphed into, actually, we'll never have peace in the world until Putin is gone, and then until Russia's carved into 5 pieces. I mean, nobody in the 2020 or 2016 campaign, or for that matter, the 2012 campaign, remember when Mitt Romney said the Russians were a big threat, and Obama derisively dismissed him in the debate and said, the 80s are over, Mitt. Do you want the 80s back?
No, he said the 80s called, they want their foreign policy back.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. So the point here is that this fact that in the middle of this conflict, when Joe said it's Putin's inflation. If he gave the order to destroy Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 with or without doing it properly, but if he gives that order, he owns inflation. With that move, and also with his grotesque, wasteful, corrupt spending policies, are clearly responsible for this inflation. And inflation is not, as we've discussed before, it's not a minor problem. Most people don't save, and they have costs they don't know how to bear, and their incomes are under threat. You start jacking up prices, you're destroying many, many families around the world. And here, the Europeans are going to wake up tomorrow when the reporting is on this, and they're going to say, wait a minute, the reason we're paying higher, triple or 10 times what we're paying for gas and for other things is because Joe Biden blew up Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, and now the Russians are going to go around saying, listen, as a guest, they're going to say, go to these different people and say, listen, if you think you're going to escape unscathed for having done this, for having supported the Americans, for having lied to the world, you think you're going to pay no price? You're wrong. And you better start, changing your tune, and we might be not as rough on this country over here if you start cooperating, but we're going to make an example of the countries that have bought into and sold these lies that have damaged many lives in Ukraine, in Russia, in Europe, around the world. And we are not going back to a status quo ante position where the world is led by the United States and we do the United States bidding. Look how they lied.
It's not only the lying, Charles. I mean, it's beyond terrorism. I mean, this is pure thuggery. This is straight Sopranos diplomacy where you just blow up the other guy's business so that your business improves. I mean, who on earth could possibly think that that's remotely close to okay? It's like beyond an act of war. It's just, I can't even, there's no words. I can't think of anything else like it that's ever happened. We've got somebody dismantling the fence, I guess, right here. They're dismantling it.
Well, So Jason, if I could draw a comparison, because I think it'd be worth to just dwell on this for a second. If you recall, in the case where Trump was impeached for congratulating Zelensky on his win,
Right.
and then for encouraging Zelensky, it's alleged, to consider investigating the Biden family for corruption in Ukraine.
Right.
That gets an impeachment. That gets a circus.
Crazy.
Right? And here we have a man whose family has had the benefit of not being under investigation the way it should have been, for being in league and taking money from Ukraine and also from China, and maybe other countries. That man has propelled us into this conflict. Everything that makes no sense to do from America's national interest is the first thing that this idiot does.
Yeah.
And we're on the precipice of World War III because of him, and he doesn't deserve to be impeached, or worse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's shocking, Charles. I mean, there's never been anything like this before. And yet there's still people inside these office buildings who support that moron and who think that this is all okay and who laugh in these hearings and say they don't understand what this is all about. I think that's the problem. They don't understand what this is all about.
Well, that's why they're working there.
Right.
Yeah, you got to pick the fools, right?
Yeah.
I mean, remember in the medieval period, I know you and I were both, didn't we go back in time a while back into like the 1500s, and you go into these royal palaces and there's the jester and the king. The jester's supposed to entertain the king. Here, the jester is running the country.
Yeah.
And he's not funny.
No.
I mean, we should talk a little bit about the State of the Union. I mean, I don't know how much of that you saw last night.
Well, I listened to it. I didn't get to see it, but I heard him getting heckled.
Well, he got the name of the fellow in Memphis who was killed by the cops. He angled that name. He referred to the majority leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, as the minority leader of the Senate. He went off into Never Never Land, drawing some comparison, the United States leading the world to China, and he just got all lost. And his arguments about where the economy is were factually not even incorrect. They're in a different universe.
Yeah.
You know, maybe what he's talking about, if there's a clone of Earth around Alpha Centauri, maybe it happened over there that way, but not in the United States.
Well, he's stuck in the Doctor Strange multiverse of madness. Remember, we did that episode.
And you know, another thing that for people who may not know this, this I think comes just after Jeff Gerth released his report on the mainstream media and the way they falsely sold the Russia hoax. And people know it's a matter of public record that Jeff Gerth and Cy Hersh are very close associates.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, they are. And sort of like mentor-mentee, but I mean, both of them are extremely famous individuals, and both of them have produced outstanding work, the kind you'll never see again in the New York Times, the Washington Post, or San Francisco Chronicle, or what passes for the mainstream press. You're never going to see that again, because if you had people with honor and experience and a sense of really fulfilling the duties of investigative journalism requires, those people would be demolishing the existing management structure and reportage teams, and would be going into Maggie Haberman and say, you're giving, not only are you giving your Pulitzer back, but you're going to get the money back.
Yeah.
One way or another, because if you don't do that, you're fired with extreme prejudice. No pension, no nothing. You're out of here.
Wow.
That's what I did.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be done. The press is supposed to be, you know, the fourth estate. It's supposed to be one of the checks and balances. But, I mean, the press, the Congress, they're supposed to represent us. And they're in there saying, oh, no, let Twitter. This was one of the craziest things, not to go back to the hearing, Charles, but, you know, the lawyer from the Critical Race Theory Law School and the guy who wants to post his thesis about how underage people should be able to consent to relationships, they're talking about hate speech. And they say definitively, oh, well, this person did this thing, and, you know, the ADL says this is anti-Semitism. I mean, listen, I'm not for anti-Semitism, but the point of the matter is, we've said this a million times. What one person considers hate speech, another person thinks is a valid thing that needs to be discussed. And so somebody who might want to speak out against transgenderism or homosexuality or Judaism or Nazism or whatever. They have the right to do it, even if you particularly hate that subject that they're speaking about. It's amazing to me that all these people sat in there and thought that they could pick and choose and decide what were the topics that were okay to discuss. And Charles, the thing that the people who said, I don't understand what this hearing is about, don't realize is that the hearing is about the manipulation of the free market of ideas leading us to exactly where we are right now, a senile idiot and his crackhead son marching us into a war because they wanted a couple of $1 million.
It's a good story.
Yeah.
You could have, isn't there a television show, there's Storage Wars, I think it's called?
Yes.
You could have a crackhead wars.
Yeah, we have it right now.
And another point, I haven't done the work that's required yet, but I will. Jake Sullivan, through all this, emerges as, and Victoria Nuland and Anthony Blinken emerge as particularly soiled and disreputable individuals. I mean, Sullivan was a wise ass working for Clinton in the White House, Hillary Clinton, and then in the campaign. Sullivan was centrally involved selling the Russian hoax, propelling the Russian hoax. Nuland, we can speak about what she did. Lisa Ranahan, I think, knows that better than I do, but under Bush and later, under Obama, and now under the meathead. And Blinken, to me, he's the opposite of the type of person who projects strength. I mean, he comes across as a milquetoasty guy, not really qualified for this job. Maybe he should teach sociology and code college or something like that. But he is not my idea of a Secretary of State.
No,
I mean, at all. And then that's before you get to the West Exec firm that he created with other people who are still West Exec.
Yeah, no, you brought that up, and nobody's really spoken about that since then.
Right. And so this was a place for the people who were utterly incompetent but had to work to protect Obama and Clinton and the Bushes. That's where they got perched in this firm that advertised itself as, look, we're people, we're a government in waiting, basically. Hire us. They got hired at all these fancy multinationals were willing to hedge their bets and send 6, maybe 7-figure checks to this team, thinking that it's a lot cheaper to do that than to fight the Justice Department or have to actually compete to get things out of the foreign aid budget or whatever you want out of these jokers, these corrupt jokers. And so if you were to put together, I would venture to say that if you went into upstate New York, and I love upstate New York, and you went into a rural police department where the police chief in the summer rode to work on a tractor, and he had working for him only high school members of the football team, I think that group, maybe of 3 to 6 people, could get on their tractors and with the proper authority figure out the depth of this corruption. Because all of these people who seem to be tied in all of these scandals are the same people. Right? You have Clinton, the Clintons, and you have Comey, Mueller, and Rosenstein, all involved, in my opinion, trying to cover up the depth of depravity that centers on the Clinton package.
Yeah, and Jim Baker is part of that team. Jim Baker is part of that Mueller, Comey, Rosenstein team, I would say.
Right. You have Christopher, I only fly Private Ray, who wants us to all focus on the perils posed by white extremism. Yes. At a time when we've got open borders and all sorts of other problems. He, as I think Sidney Powell very well analyzed in her book, License to Lie, he covered up, or obfuscated is a better word, what really happened with Enron and what really happened with the financial crisis in the internet bubble time period, in and after that time period. And he was in private practice, I think, from around 7 through 9. I may have that slightly wrong, but nobody's ever gotten really to the bottom of what happened in 7 to 9, or in how the financial institutions really covered up their mistakes by pushing central banks around the world to lower interest rates, prop up the value of assets, and keep everyone dumb, fat, and happy, and keep the rich ever richer.
I think there's a pretty standard playbook, Charles, for what they do with these guys from the FBI, because it's not just Wray, it's not just Comey, it's Louis Freeh, it's all these guys. They do what they're supposed to do at the FBI, then they have their cush partnership at whatever law firm, their general counsel job at whatever major weapons contractor or whatever, and this is the path to making millions while just distorting justice and ruining people's lives. It's crazy.
It is really crazy. But I think it is encouraging to see the Seymour Hersh story is very encouraging on the heels of the Jeff Grift piece about the mainstream media and the Russian hoax. I have also alerted certain key friends in positions around the world that this Hersh story is something to be taken seriously. The attitude, I mean, the team that initially responded to the Hersh piece is less talented than Katrine Jean-Pierre, whatever it's Katrine. I mean, to just say, no, this is completely false. Okay, why is it false?
Right.
Because we say it's false.
Right.
I mean, we're not the people who spent, how many years now? Was it 8 years pushing, Donald Trump will get us to World War III?
They still think that's true, though. In Congress, they still think that's true. They say, oh, we know Russia interfered in 2016, so let's now consider all this. They rely on lies to formulate their opinions, and they continue to do that.
Right, and I think one of the reasons they're so cocky in that meeting is that they all have been told by MSNBC and ABC and NBC and all the different outlets, we need you to be fiery in the meeting, and then you'll be on tonight on this show and that show.
Right.
That show.
Raskin was in there wearing a do-rag. Did you see this? I guess he's got cancer or something.
I'm sorry for that. I mean,
I am as well. But the do-rag I don't think was appropriate for Congress, and he's capitalizing on a recent rule change that was put in place for Ilhan Omar against headwear. So
these are silly people.
Yes.
Very silly and dangerous people. And frankly, what I think folks don't really appreciate here, going beyond the European and across Atlantic issues, China is looking at this and saying, God, these Biden people are stupid. We would give them $100 billion. Instead, they settle for, however many crack whores Hunter got and whatever many tens of millions they may have gotten. Because a clear beneficiary of this the fact here that it would seem that the United States at the highest levels, and we, the citizens of the state, tolerated bold deceit. We are fanning the flames leading to World War III and lying about what happened with Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, if Hersh is right, which I think he is.
I think he is.
And if you're sitting there, I know from my many decades of work in Europe and around the world, people will be nice to Americans, particularly if they can offer something that the other parties want. But Americans do, as a group, myself included, at perhaps more at an earlier age, have a tendency of believing that only they know what is best for the world, and just barging ahead and saying, we're going to do it this way, and you better get behind us. Our job is to lead, you follow. Well, a lot of people don't like that, and justifiably so, particularly when what we're arguing for is insane and criminal.
Well, and also when your recent other things have failed. It's one thing when you're on top and you have all the money and all the guns, everybody's like, well, better listen to this guy. But then when you leave all that in Afghanistan and the fruits of your labor are all rotten, it starts to turn the tide, doesn't it?
Exactly. And then you've got this son of a Nazi who's trying to, on an unelected basis, say, forget that juicy steak, and don't ask me what I'm actually. Bugs for you. Only bugs. Really gross ones.
Unbelievable. It's terrible, Charles. It's really terrible. I mean, I hope that we are able to kind of pull this back from the brink. And I do have confidence because there are people like James Comer and the other Republicans who were there today. It's almost like we've got sensible people and completely insane people sitting there having a debate. And I just hope that the complete insanity does not continue to prevail in the way that it has in recent times.
I agree. And when you think about, I haven't been all over Ukraine, but I've been there a number of times, and I've been to many places, and I've driven probably 1,000 miles around Ukraine.
Wow.
I was driven 1,000 miles around Ukraine, and um, it's difficult for me to think about the damage that we have caused there.
Yeah.
Actual damage, destroying historic buildings, killing people, maiming people,
Yeah.
not being willing to listen to the other side. What kind of a lesson does that send or teach or give to the fellow in North Korea? The United States never going to listen to you? Okay, fine. We'll nuke South Korea to the Stone Age if you're not going to listen to it. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's so damaging. Obviously, loss of human life and property in the way that you've described, but the loss of pride. I mean, I'm ashamed of what has been done in the name of this country. And, you and I and other people who are appearing on Crowdsource the Truth and the viewers and the sponsors and everybody I know has been trying in their own way to, share this kind of information with friends and family, not to be annoying, not to be ostracized, not so that everybody says, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, because we want to help, we want to stop this. And it's just so frustrating to realize that so many people reject the information, and it's hard to understand how they can think that these are the right things to do.
Right. Well, and they have that Kunta Kinte cloth, or what is it called? Kinte cloth, wearing moron, son of a rat catcher, who's obviously failed miserably because the rat population is even more out of control today in New York. I'm talking about actual rodents.
Yeah.
Saying that Biden adeptly rope-a-doped the Republicans last night.
What?
By getting Republicans to say repeatedly that we wouldn't cut Social Security and Medicare. Now, let's think about how stupid that is, because what I think Biden has done, by accident, I hope, he has turned the Democratic Party into a party of thermonuclear war lovers.
Yeah.
I mean, right? These are chicken hawks in the main. And I'm not a chicken hawk, but I never served in the military. But I do have reverence for the people like my father and other people I know who did serve in the military, and who might have been killed or worse. Being maimed or mentally incapacitated for a long life is probably worse. But these are people who are just saying, at this moment in time, after we've depleted our own stocks of ammunition with our open borders, north and south, with diminished national stature, you really want to go up against the one nation that's got the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons, that is more homogeneous than the United States, that has a 1,000-year history of resisting invaders.
Right.
Which a hot button over there is we're going to be invaded by the Germans in particular.
Right.
You really want to instigate that at the same time that you're going to, you've left all this material scattered across Afghanistan that's now all over the volatile Middle East and other flashpoints in Africa. You want to do all this, exhibit this type of corrupt lawlessness, just as China, which is teetering on the brink, I would argue, of economic ruin. You want to give them a strong argument for marching in and taking Taiwan and proceeding to try to eject the United States from the Pacific region. I mean, this is a master class in asshole behavior. It's a master ass.
Yeah.
And at what point do you stop saying, listen, the first time you did it, it was sort of cute, Uncle Joe, when you showed up at the 12-year-old girl's birthday party in your underwear, drunk,
smelling hair.
We just laughed that off. But now we've got, what do they call that thing in Seattle? The homeless encampment.
Oh, CHOP, the CHOP.
Yeah. That's what the President of the United States is living inside one of those. Who knows what he does when he's not on TV? But he doesn't make much sense. And in this Hersh piece, to circle back to it, it's an indictment of Joe. It's an indictment of Sullivan. It's an indictment of Newland. It's an indictment of Blinken. It's an indictment of Kamala Harris, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, these people should be nowhere near a position of trust in any part of the United, and they shouldn't be involved checking to make sure whether the hot dogs they're serving to little kids at a circus are not rancid.
Yeah.
They don't have the judgment to do that. And look what we got.
Speaking of poor judgment, Charles, I forgot to mention to you, just walking through the halls of Congress today trying to find the cafeteria, which is not easy, I ran into John Podesta. I didn't have a camera
Really?
with me. Yeah, he wouldn't talk to me. I just was like, John Podesta, and he looked at me. I said, the Podfather, and he started walking away. But he's still in there doing whatever he does.
In there, he was given responsibility for doling out $300 billion in green card.
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, Charles. I don't know what to say beyond that. It's very frustrating. But I am going to continue to communicate with Mr. Comer and try to share the information that I've developed with him and with Jim Jordan. And I agree with Representative Luna. These people, it's fine to sit there and say, to the best of my recollection, Senator, or whatever, these people have been so trained. I'm talking about now Gaddy, Roth, Baker, obviously. They've been so trained. First of all, the only one there who's not a lawyer is Roth. And Roth, I think, has been so conditioned as to what to say when you don't know the answer, or what to say when you don't want to give a truthful answer but don't want to perjure yourself. They have that very, very well organized. And it's one thing to sit there and be made uncomfortable and asked questions, but I agree with what Representative Luna was saying. These people have got to be indicted. There is sufficient evidence here to bring a grand jury and indict each one of them, stick them in jail, and then see what they remember.
Exactly. I think that's true. Now, I couldn't watch the beginning of it. Do we know whether these people were testifying under oath or they were voluntarily?
You know what? I didn't get there until later because I've been on a mad drive for the past 2 days to get here from Florida. So I'm not sure, but I am going to review it all on YouTube. It was live streamed. Did you catch this, Charles? Like right around 11:30 a.m. or no, maybe a little later than that, like right around lunchtime, the power went out. And the session had to stop. And it was overheard by somebody who I know who was there. It was overheard where Comer apparently said, in 6 years of doing this, there's never been a power outage. So maybe it was a coincidence, but I mean, it was beautiful today. It was like 50-something degrees. Why is there suddenly a power outage? Pretty weird.
Because you were there.
Probably. The technical snafus seem to follow me. Well, Charles, we're on a little bit of a modified format here, not in studio, not on a walk and talk, but we might be doing a little bit of a shorter episode today. I know there's a ton to talk about with Seymour Hersh, and there's going to be more developing, but was there anything more that you wanted to cover tonight?
Well, I would expect I would look for the Russian response. I think this is going to be, I know in a business context, if somebody lied to me this abjectly, painted me for a long period of time and damaged my country, put it under sanctions, my company under sanctions, put me under the threat of losing everything, hung the specter of a nuclear war over the heads of my people, I wouldn't. I would insist on a change of team.
Yeah.
I would say, listen, we will never. The world does not want World War II. But we are not going to get to a negotiating table with people who lie so abjectly, so brazenly, and refuse to even admit that they're lying. We're never going to get there. And if you want the Russian state to reach the conclusion that there's no prospect of that we're boxed into a corner where you're going to annihilate us, you're going to gravely limit our range of options, and you're not going to like any of it. And this is clear now. I'd say this absolutely clear that the people who think they're running NATO have turned what has been sold to the Russians, the Soviets before them, as a defensive alliance. That it only comes together when it's under attack. If you really expect us to believe that, then you're saying that you think we're stupid.
Right.
Because you're obviously not a defensive alliance. You instigated this conflict. We told you the reasons why we're doing this. We suspect that that it's not just Ukraine that needs to be denazified. It could be the World Economic Forum.
Yes.
It could be
NATO.
elements in the UK, and France, and Germany, and elsewhere. And Russia lost a lot of people, Soviet Union, in World War II and World War I combined.
Yeah.
We lost people, but nowhere near the same.
Right.
And we don't, I think, have the same standing to sit there, having spirited many Nazis out of Germany at the conclusion of World War II. We don't have the same standing to say, well, yeah, actually, we're kind of in with Nazis. We like Nazis.
They are.
And I don't think the number of blockheads in Congress includes many who would get up and try to say that, we really like Nazism. We think, it's really something that hasn't been given a fair shake. I don't think that sells well anywhere because it's so stupid and morally indefensible. So I would expect a very rugged response. I don't know what it's going to involve, but it's not going to be, oh, well, people say bad things about us all the time. None of that. It's a new era, I think, in pugnaciousness that we're going to see out of these people. Justifiable.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, honestly, Russia should declare NATO a terrorist organization if this pipeline attack is shown to be correct, if Seymour Hersh's assessment of it is shown to be correct, which I think it is. It's obvious. Why would Russia bomb their own pipeline? And I mean, we've spoken about this offline, Charles, but it deserves reiterating. This is also the same group of people who don't want you to cook on a gas stove because that might be bad for the environment, but they're going to explode a pipeline and release more gas into the environment than anybody ever has just because that's what they want to do.
Or the same people who say that you shouldn't fly around except if you're Bill Gates on your own private plane because you're part of the solution. That's why you get to do it. I mean, it's just proof positive that of anything else, our educational system has been just turned into a cesspool. You ought to take anybody who thinks today that they're a tenured professor here or there, the starting position should be, you were a tenured professor. But unless these people who are promoting this bullshit are called to account, then you could be a tenured professor at the taxable Harvard University,
right?
Where you're going to pay taxes on your profit and your endowment, and you're going to pay a huge tax bill. In the past, you're going to pay property taxes. You can keep this shit going. We'll see how well you do.
Yeah. Well, what about all the excise taxes from them getting called out for their past misdeeds? But Charles, I'm getting the battery warning here, so I think it might be time for us to wrap for today. But it's been another excellent episode, and I want to thank you, Charles, and I want to thank all the people who make trips like this to Washington, D.C. possible. I want to thank the sponsors who are watching on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth. If you want to stick it to the social engineers, become a sponsor on Odyssey. They really want to shut that down for whatever reason. And Charles, I'll see you on Sunday. I don't want to tell people what we're going to do for Sunday. I don't like to anticipate the future there, but thanks again, and have a great night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.